So if I could just begin by asking you, Leanne, how has Raymond Williams influenced you as a person and as a politician?
I That's quite a difficult question to answer, really, because I've come across Raymond Williams in different times in my life and for different purposes. I think one of the strongest influences has been the emphasis on community as like the basic building block, the foundation of political activity, really. And unless we can get our communities right, then it's difficult to see how we can get anything else right politically. And I think that Raymond Williams' understanding of community in a Welsh context is something that I've drawn upon quite heavily throughout my political work. And I think that the Raymond Williams coming from that place of bringing people together, building bridges between different traditions and cultures within Wales and without, is something that I've personally found very attractive, especially in a time when there has been so much division in the political sphere.
Okay, so within Williams's writings, he does refer to more than one type of Welsh community and different cultures, different classes of people within Wales. Has that influenced you particularly?
Yes, because I see differences between people, and I think what we need to do is try to reduce, well, not so much reduce those differences, but reduce the divisions that those differences could cause. So, for example, there's a lot of discussion at the moment around differentials in spending between the north and the south of Wales. And there are discussions, less so now, but around the divisions between people who speak Welsh as a first language, or people who've learned Welsh, or people who don't have any Welsh at all. And it's interesting to see, in my time active in politics over the last 30 years, those divisions, especially on the Welsh language, have diminished, they've reduced. More and more people have come around to an understanding that the Welsh language isn't a threat to them if they don't speak it. But in the past, I think, it's been used as a political weapon to divide people by certain political actors, and I'm encouraged that there's less of a division on that front now. But I think when Raymond Williams was writing, that would have been more stark. And I think his work around looking at borders is helpful in this, because he's not just talking about the border between Wales and England, he's talking about the borders between rural and urban Wales, or Welsh speaking and non-Welsh speaking Wales, or the city and the country, and political differences as well. But we need to not see those as divisions, and I think that's something that I take from his work very strongly.
I love the way that comes out in his novels, you know, where he might be standing in quite a rural area, or one of his characters might be, and then he can see the glow of the furnaces and so on in the background, and you really get a sense that there are different parts of Wales that are even visible from one particular standpoint.
Well, there's one scene that stands out for me, a discussion in the 1926 general strike, in the railway carriage, or the railway siding where his dad is working, and there's a discussion about, you know, the two sides of the strike, just between two people who work together in that small little village of Pandy. And in a way, that's all of Wales right there in that small little conversation.
Absolutely. I was wondering whether you've got any views on the way in which the ability to speak Welsh and sort of communicating in Welsh sort of socially and culturally can have different socio-cultural significance depending on the geography of where you are.
I think there are differences. Certainly if you grow up in a town like Caernarfon, then the chances are that you will have used Welsh for most of your life, from the beginning of your life, all through your education. The chances are that you will work through the medium of Welsh. All your family life will take place through the medium of Welsh. that is much more difficult to achieve in the valleys or in rural areas that are not as part of the kind of north and the west traditionally strong areas where Welsh has been spoken as a first language for a long time, longer than English. So there are differences, and I think often it's expressed in terms of confidence. So Welsh speakers will sometimes express a lack of confidence in speaking English or expressing themselves through the medium of English, particularly in the official world. And then people who have been through Welsh medium education in, say, Cardiff or in the former industrial areas may feel a lot less confident expressing themselves, say in an interview or in a formal situation through the medium of Welsh. But these are just questions of confidence and practice and usage, and I don't really see anything different in socio-economic terms. But then of course there's the class question, which exists through the medium of Welsh as it exists through the medium of English, and so you may well find that some Welsh speakers in some parts of Cardiff are from more wealthy socio-economic backgrounds, and you may find that Welsh speakers on council estates just outside Caernarfon are more working class. But I don't think that's a reflection on the language in any way.
No, I really quite like the way Raymond Williams sort of captures that and alludes to it in the way he talks about the fact that actually English-speaking Welsh culture is just as important as Welsh-speaking Welsh culture, but although we need to acknowledge the history and the sort of the colonialism by which that's evolved, and not to forget the fact that we were prevented from speaking Welsh in Wales for all of those years. So I think he brings all of those aspects together.
Definitely. And I think, this idea, I feel a definite resentment that I wasn't socialised through the medium of Welsh. I mean, it's there are lots of reasons why the Welsh language has been pretty much obliterated and reborn in areas like the valleys. But I do feel like I'm missing out, that I'm not quite in tune with all aspects of Welshness sometimes. I felt it particularly starkly when there are big names in Welsh literature or big names in Welsh music that I've never come across, or I would have only had little reference to, and I've only heard about them after they've passed. And I feel like a real sense of loss, that I've missed out on something there. I remember coming across Dafydd Iwan in my 20s. I'd never heard of Dafydd Iwan before I was in my 20s and come across and was politically active with people who were Welsh speakers, and he's an absolute legend. And to realise that many people would not be familiar with his work and other people's work because of that is very, very sad, and I think it's something we must work to overcome.
Yeah, I'm sure there are ways of doing that. As someone who's emigrated to Wales, if you like, from England, and who's also spent quite a lot of time in Scotland, I can actually notice a very strong Welshness about the English-speaking Welsh people and about the Welsh language, the English language as spoken in the South Wales valleys, for example. It's not the same as it, but then I suppose you could say that about the north of England or the west of England, where there are certain
different colloquialisms and dialects.
Yeah.
In English-speaking Welsh, it's quite interesting that many Welsh speakers can trace the way that people speak back to the Welsh language. So, there are many sort of idioms we use in English that are actually referring to the Welsh. So it just adds an extra interesting layer, and, we spent hours talking about those little quirks, but yeah, it does add an interesting dimension to things.
I know Raymond Williams, as you've already mentioned, his sort of his having grown up on the border, where he writes, doesn't he, about the fact that although people would converse and learn through the medium of English, they would sing in Welsh, they would learn Welsh poetry and so on. So there's a real kind of eclectic mix really in that sort of border country. But interestingly, he never learned to speak the Welsh language. I often wonder, had he lived, whether he would have used his time in his later years maybe to acquaint himself with the Welsh language, perhaps.
That's an interesting question. We will never know. But he was certainly someone who was very positive about the Welsh language, so it would make a logical, sensible next step for him to have learned had he lived longer.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many questions about had Raymond Williams lived. You know, what would he have made of Brexit? What would he have made of social media? I mean, one of the other interviews I did, we were talking about the fact that Raymond Williams had written a piece about the noisiness of life, that just the kind of general noise that sometimes he needed to get away from in order to write. And you know, I wonder how social media would have added to that noisiness.
That's interesting. I often wonder with social media, and Raymond Williams talked a lot about how important the democratisation of media would be in order for us to change society. And in a way, social media is the ultimate in democratised media in one way, because everybody has a broadcast voice and it's totally unfiltered and unedited and uncensored. Yet at the same time, the big companies behind these social media outlets are very, very powerful and unregulated. And so I would love to have a conversation with Raymond Williams about social media and this whole question of democratisation.
It would be fantastic to hear his analysis on that, you know, because he wrote so much about things like television and other forms of popular culture. This would have been really wonderful for him to explore.
It would, yeah, definitely.
Is there anything in any particular aspect of Raymond Williams' writing that you feel is particularly resonant with you and how your life and your politics have developed?
I think the struggle through adversity, when he talks about how people can gain strength and power from pulling together at difficult times. And I think our history here in the former industrial areas is, you know, it's just a catalogue of that really. And I think that the power and strength of the communities that we still have here is testament to that as well. And I loved that bit where he talked about when he first went to Cambridge and challenged the lecturer about the concept of neighbour. And the lecturer was explaining neighbour as a thing of the past, something in Shakespearean times, something that we don't have access to now. And Raymond Williams disagreed profoundly with that, because he understood the term neighbour as meaning what he experienced in his own community. And I really identified with that, because I remember going to university myself, and it was only Treforest, but I met people from all over, not just the UK, but from different parts of the world as well. And we used to talk quite a lot about this community spirit thing, and of course I didn't really understand it in the terms that Raymond Williams put it. But when I read that sentence, I remember thinking, yeah, that's why people from different places couldn't quite get what it was that we were talking about there. And I think that is that's something that marks us out as different, and it gives us something that is precious and something that we really need to hold on to. So it comes back to this point about seeing community as the basic building block of political activity and organisation, really. It all kind of ties in, you know, into...
I did mention earlier about that I'd noticed that there does seem to be, particularly with the centenary of Raymond Williams, a bit of a resurgence of interest in Williams, particularly in his politics amongst younger people. And I'm picking stuff up from social media and so on that far more... But when I first discovered Raymond Williams, nobody, even in Wales, knew that much about him, yet now that seems to be changing. Do you think that there might be some lessons to be learned from Williams that maybe people coming into politics might, as younger people, might be able to take forward?
I think what's attractive is the insistence that we must always have hope, and many people, and I think probably especially young people, can see so many difficulties at the moment, so many challenges and obstacles to trying to achieve a better world, that we're all kind of desperately looking for resources of hope. And I think that you know, there aren't many sort of political writers that so consistently provide that hope, and I'd like to think that, you know, that if you're right about what you're saying about young people finding Raymond Williams now, that it would be because of that, and looking to find ways in which we can organise, agitate, advocate for change that give people something to hold on to in very dark and difficult political times. I mean, the Brexit situation for many has caused an existential crisis, and it's been very difficult to see where the points of hope have been coming out of that. But they are there, and we have to dig deep to find them. And I think with COVID as well, even though, you know, there have been horrendous stories, the death toll in so many countries has been horrific, there have still been little glimmers of hope. So people, especially right at the very beginning, came together, didn't they, to form networks of volunteers to ensure that people were looked after, and that, you know, where the state was found wanting because of years of austerity, can we pull together as communities and fill that gap? So I'd like to think that more and more people will be attracted to the idea that even though things are difficult and dark, there is hope there.
Yeah. I think what's interesting as well is that Raymond Williams had very much started to be writing about green issues and the red and the green in the period leading up to his unfortunate and untimely death, and I do kind of wonder where that would have gone, and I think green issues are something that younger people are interested in, aren't they?
Definitely, and that idea again of building alliances at that grassroots level, at the community level, so bringing together people who want to work on ecological and environmental issues with those people who are working in the women's movement, or are working in the trade union movement, or who are, you know, in communities providing basic services like food provision, which is necessary these days. The power that could be brought together by bringing that energy together, I think, is as valid today as when he was writing about that in the 1980s.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, perhaps that's a good point to end on. And is there anything else that you particularly wanted to say?
Where to begin with all the other stuff, really. I mean, I'm really interested in all the questions around imperialism and nationalism and civic nationalism and all those kinds of questions as well, but maybe we'll have to leave that for another day, Jan.
Well, I mean, if there's anything that you'd like to sort of bring in, that's absolutely fine.
Well, I think it just in this post-Brexit context, you know, there's quite a lot of ugly xenophobia and nationalism, not just within Britain, but we've seen it in the United States. We've seen it as part of the driver behind the disastrous COVID death figures in Brazil. And, you know, there is a certain type of big, strong man, big power nationalism that Raymond Williams would have absolutely rejected in favour of a much more sort of civic, people-centred, I'm not even, you know, probably wouldn't have called that nationalism, but it is a different beast altogether to what we're seeing in some places dominant. I mean, in France now, it looks like Marine Le Pen is going to do quite well, and these conditions, these times are quite the conditions are there for right-wing politics, far-right politics to dominate, and there's only one way that we'll counter that, and that is by offering something different that can build people up rather than other those who are different. And there's a real discussion I think that we could do with having about all of that, and Raymond's input into that would be very welcome, I think.
And I think perhaps, as people often say, asking somebody to read Raymond Williams is probably not the way to go, because it is quite complex and sometimes impenetrable, but to find ways of offering the message, almost like a translation into ordinary speak of what Raymond Williams had to say, and that is what we've tried to do to a certain extent with these explainers that we've produced, these little videos and so on. But I think we can probably do a lot more, so that message can get across in a maybe through the school curriculum, for example. There may be ways of doing that, just to further the message that, you know, someone from Wales, who grew up in Wales, who went to Cambridge, who spoke so knowledgeably and with such great heart about his Welsh identity, could actually have that influence. We can only hope.
Yeah, definitely. Well, putting this together is going to make a good contribution, I think. In this centenary year, all the work that's going on, it's going to just help people have more people have more access, isn't it? Great thing.